Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this critical thought, a detailed discussion on game design, and be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future critical thought topics. Alright, for today's critical thought, this is going to be based on the podcast that by the time you're watching this should hopefully be up on Game Wisdom. This is the cast where we talked about emergent game design and immersive sims, or bringing the player into the world of whatever the game space may be. For today's critical thought, we're going to focus on the opposite, or the elements that break that immersion and that emergent gameplay. And what we were talking about on the podcast is this is when you can kind of see the hand of the designer basically at work here to override the lore or the setting of the game. When I talk about games as being gamey, this is where this kind of concept comes from. And like I said, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's very easy to see examples of this. In fact, it's so easy that we're going to play a little game. I'm going to give you some hypothetical situations that are what happens when the designer basically steps over the game, or as we said, when things become gamey. And I want you to write down in the comments below what games you've seen this from. And I want to see if everyone gets either the same answers or different ones. So here we go. The first one. You walk into a very large room, completely deserted, and it's supposed to be either like an ancient civilization or everyone should be long dead, and it just so happens there's a big pile of ammo and a bunch of chest-high walls. Another one, you are sneaking through a level, not avoiding to be detected at all costs, and then a cutscene happens and now you're in the middle of a room in a giant firefight. Your character is a badass who can take bullets to the face, can be set on fire and knocked around by grenades and is still fine, but then during a cutscene you get punched in the back of the head and you're out for who knows how long. The ever popular, the boss during a cutscene is just completely invulnerable to all damage because plot demands it, and then when it's time to fight him, he goes down with like a basic gun or anything like that. Or, here's another one of my favorites. The whole world is exploding around you, and you need to get out. And it just so happens that all the walls and ceilings collapse in such a way to present the most optimal way out. And then there's, of course, another good one. Oh, I was just thinking of this one before we started, and now it's escaping me. Maybe it will come to me as we're talking. But the point is, these are elements when you can tell that the world or the situation itself is no longer basically in control. It's when the designer essentially steps in and tries to force things for the player. And we could probably have like our own TV tropes page, if there isn't one already, about all these different situations. And to the topic itself, this is when the immersion of the game, or the immersion, just completely breaks down. When you're no longer exploring this world, but you are being basically forcibly guided by the designer to do something or perform some kind of task. Now, some designers have figured out clever ways of guiding the player without guiding them. And one of the biggest examples of this would be Valve in the Half-Life series. And how it just so happens that that one spotlight way in the distance over there, that one streetlight that's on, that's where you have to go. Or that things may be destroyed around you, but you can see like way in the distance the correct path. It's essentially a kind of organic level design or an organic flow to guide the player from point A to point B. Another good example of when things break, speaking about that kind of level design, is when you're presented with a very wide environment, but there's only one way to go forward, only one way that can actually work. And another major part of breaking the immersion of a game and also ruining emergent gameplay has to do when designers basically override the rules they've set out. And we'll talk about that one in a minute. Now, when it comes to building this world or building the immersion sense of things, it's really about establishing the tone of the world and then having that factor into your character. If I'm playing, well, as we talked on the podcast, in the Thief series, we are playing a thief. We're not playing a super soldier. We're not playing a military guy or a common citizen. We're playing someone whose whole profession is about sneaking in and stealing from people. So, with that set, our mechanics and basically our action verbs for this game have to all revolve around thieving. You won't play a game that's built around thieving or stealth, and one of your options is use a rocket launcher and blow up enemies. Which that takes me to the other point that I forgot. Here's the last trope. You're playing a game where you're supposed to be sneaking and hiding around, and then every boss is a hand-to-hand battle or shootout that you can't escape from. Oh, and speaking of which, ever popular arena fights. Whenever you walk into a big room and there's no one in there, chances are there's about 30, 40 guys, waiting in the rafters to jump down and attack you. But these are all elements when the organic world or the organic rules of the game are basically being overridden by the designer. And in games that are very either completely unrealistic or just complete fantasy, it's not that big of a deal. If we're playing some crazy game where I don't know, a alien monkey hunting down the space bananas with a jetpack, then we're not really caring about immersion all that much. But if we're playing a game where we're supposed to be a desperate survivor who's trying to cling on for dear life, then throwing us into a battle with 30 armed soldiers and asking us to win is kind of a bit of a stretch there. And that takes me to the other part of this discussion about emergent game design and immersion. Or, yeah, I think I said that right. The point is, if you are building your game around a series of rules, then those rules have to remain consistent. And we talked about this in an earlier critical thought. If I'm playing a game where I have fire match, and I'm going to throw fireballs at everything that I want, then if you put me inside a wooden house, don't tell me that the doors are locked and I need to find a key. I could just literally throw a fireball and burn the wall down or burn the door down. And this is again when the design and the intent by the developer are not meshing together. And it's one of those very tricky concepts about giving the player a lot of abilities. Because when you give the player all manner of powers, levitation, invisibility, invincibility, you name it, then your game has to be designed around that. And not in the way of just putting up a hard wall and say, oh, you have invisibility, but guess what, in this area it doesn't work. Or, if I have a spell that makes me fire immune, and I go up against a dragon, then I shouldn't expect to take any damage when that dragon breathes fire on me. But one of the things that we've seen with developers, and when things kind of fall apart, is when they introduce something that they can't properly balance, so they try to gamify it away. Such as, if I have the ability to, let's say, climb up walls, any kind of wall I can climb up within the open world, and then when we go into an actual level, all the walls, for whatever reason, I can't climb now. Because the developer wants me to, I don't know, run an obstacle course. This is again when the emergent sense breaks down. When we talked about emergent game design before, we talked about the idea that it's really about how a combination of rules in your game and systems interact in ways that the designer may not intend it on, or wanted you to do, but kind of left it to you to figure out. And here's an example of one. Let's say we're playing a game where I have bombs that I can put down, they cause an explosion, and they send whatever I blew up flying into the air. And I also have a little hang glider that I can activate that lets me glide and increases my jump or travel distance. So, I could go up to a boulder, put the bomb down next to it, jump onto the boulder, let it shoot me all the way up into the air. I can leap off and use my hang glider, and I just created a super, almost like a super hang gliding motion that can take me almost anywhere in the world. Now, that should sound familiar to you because that was featured in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Because, again, these mechanics are laid out in a way that they work within a logical consistency of each other. But when you combine them into different ways, it creates unique situations that in some times can actually break the design. And again, once you've established these rules, they have to remain consistent. If you give me a freeze spell that lets me freeze any body of water how I see fit, then don't put me in a level that has water and say that, no, you can't freeze this, you have to go over there and find a key and then open up the door to lower the water level. Again, when you start breaking your own rules, it breaks the immersion of the game, and it also ruins emergent game design. Now, we're going to wrap things up, I think, in the next few minutes, because this is one of those topics that there is a lot to break down, and we spent over an hour and a half talking about on the cast, which I'll put a link to it hopefully in the notes below. But if you have a specific topic regarding immersion in games or emergent game design that you'd like me to cover, please let me know in the comments below. Excuse me. But I guess to wrap things up, when you're trying to design a game and you're trying to pull the player into it, then the designer's hand should not be seen. And avoiding that, my God, that's a class right there. We could probably teach about ways to downplay the designer. But like I said, one way to avoid this is if you introduce rules or mechanics in your game, then going forward, that's how the world should operate. If I have the ability to fly, then guess what? You have to compensate for that in your level design. If you give me the power to, I don't know, shoot icicles out of my hands to create spots in the wall for me to jump on, then I should be able to do that in just about any location. And again, another major part when immersion breaks down is when you give the player these special abilities, but they simply act as keys. And I talked about this in stuff like the Tomb Raider games, or in the modern ones, that you have a rusted grate in the wall, so you would think that if I have a grenade launcher, I can blow that up. But no, the only thing that works are explosive arrows that are unlocked later on in the game. Or if you give the player the ability to set up a grapple or climbing points using arrows, but it only works on select walls. Again, when you start contradicting your own rules and what's going on, it just leads to the immersion breaking and the player no longer feeling like they're within this world. So, on the podcast, we talk about good examples such as The Legend of Zelda, the Thief series, open world games like the Elder Scrolls series. But for those of you watching, can you think of other examples of games that the world lore is consistent with the game mechanics? And it can either lead to emergent design, or everything fits within the framework of the setting as developed by the designer. With that said, we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe and check back daily for more discussions on game design. And be sure to pitch a future topic if you'd like me to cover. But otherwise, be sure to check out game-wisdom.com where we examine the art and science of games. And I will catch you all next time. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GW for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GW for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.